The author of this video is not responsible for what his brain is blurting out. Alright, this is the new setup. I deliberately decided against using the clip-on microphone because the phone microphone seems to be working better. The problem with the clip-on microphone is that it by default masks background noise, and if there is a nice scratching sound of the pencil, it disappears. But the trade-off is that from the speech, all the kind of sounds that are needed are eliminated, like S sounds, because it's being interpreted as noise. So I found an old drawing pad. This is a watercolor paper pad. It's not very grainy, but it's grainy enough to create this sort of texture. And this mark is a beginning of a drawing that I abandoned a long time ago for some reason. So I just found it and I wanted to maybe see if I can make something out of it. And the texture makes the marks a lot more grainy and foggy, and I want to kind of play with that and make something a little bit more subtle, because all the drawings that I previously posted were pretty heavy in terms of value. There was a lot of graphite on them, and here I'm going to preserve some of this light quality. So this kind of textured drawings, if you have never seen sketches done by the French artist, what was he, Belgian artist? One of the impressionists, post-impressionists, Georges Seurat. I do enjoy his paintings, his pointillist paintings, but not as much as his sketches. And that's kind of ironic because many times artists prefer, or audiences prefer, the artist's sketches because the actual pieces of art seem overdone, as if, you know, they tried too hard. The sketches have this fresh quality to them. So the Georges Seurat's sketches are done with Conti crayon. It's kind of like a little bit more dark. I think I have one here. It's a little bit more dark, kind of like pencil, but it leaves a lot darker black on paper. And with texture, it just allows you for this illusion of atmosphere and fog. It's kind of almost like drawing something that's seen through a very like poor quality camera lens with a lot of, you know, imperfections, but the imperfections make these sketches much fresher, and the illusion of light and space, the atmosphere in these drawings is very subtle. So we're building up some sort of light illusion here. So what will it be? I'm still not aspiring to make it look like something. I also don't use any reference. It goes straight from my brain onto the paper, and also allowing for bumps in the paper and happy accidents to do their thing. yeah, I kind of feel like I want to preserve some of these white spots. Speaking of trying too hard, it's a thing. There's this, I mean, having a skill at something is a thing that you develop over time. But if you are overthinking it, if you're overthinking your project, if you're trying too hard, there is this extra sort of mental block that is applied. We're trying too hard kind of makes you too self-conscious. Whereas if you are letting things go and you try to just go with it, the results are usually fresher and less contrived, less forced. You're trying too hard. It's often something that people struggle with. Yeah. So it's important to zoom out sometimes and stop and think. And even though it's kind of automatic drawing, I like to stop and think about where it wants to go, rather than obsessively just kind of keep my nose close to the paper, and which is fine too, but in this case I kind of want it to be a little bit more intentional. And I think it will take slightly less time because the texture of the paper sort of forces me to work with a little bit larger shapes. It's easier to render in some way. But if I wanted to go with very clean lines, then the texture would drive me mad. I wouldn't want the texture. But with this kind of fuzzy quality, the texture helps. It's a little bit almost like looking at something through a frosted glass, where you can kind of use these imperfections of the paper to your advantage. Sometimes, struggle makes things more interesting. It makes me think about the famous concert, and I think it was in the 70s in Germany, by a jazz musician. I think Keith Jarrett was his name. I probably don't remember it correctly. I'm going to write the name on the video. He was invited by some young organizer to play a concert in Germany, in Cologne, I think it was. And unfortunately, they didn't have a correct or decent piano in the venue. So the musician tested the piano and said, "This is totally impossible to play on. It's out of tune. It's old. Some keys don't even work." And and it's just I'm out. And then the young organizer was at this time still unexperienced. She was very distressed and begged him to make the best out of this piano and stay and play. So he said, okay, just for you, I'm going to stay and play. And so he played this improvisational piece, which turned out to be one of the most interesting live concerts. You can actually look it up. Or even buy the track to listen to. You can hear the moaning and groaning of the artist trying to squeeze out of this piano the best possible sounds. And it just created this very interesting new quality that otherwise wouldn't have happened with the, fancy piano that works perfectly. Like sometimes the struggle really adds an interesting twist to things if things don't work properly. I remember that the paintings I remember painting as a high school student were the most interesting ones. The most interesting paintings were painted when I didn't have money for materials or paints, and I just used whatever I could find. And so I have half dried out paint, and I only could use this much white paint or no white paint, and then I still had urge to create. So I didn't say, I don't want to make this painting because I don't have right materials. I just, found a piece of cardboard and painted on it with half-dried paints, with half-bald brushes, or even fingers, or whatever I could find, or sticks. And those are the most kind of badass paintings that I made because of that scarcity and that kind of struggle, pushing through the imperfection of your material. And that's the thing about resistance in general. In resistance training, if you see someone struggling to lift let's say 30-pound weights, and they're like, oh, they barely go to failure and they barely can lift. The last repetition is just barely. And then you don't go up to them and ask them, like, have you tried doing that with lighter weights? Because you know exactly what they are trying to achieve. They're trying to get stronger by applying resistance. And the same can be said for other endeavors in life. Like sometimes you just get stronger when you are pushing through some hard times and resistance. That what makes you better at things and more resilient. If everything was always easy, let's say if you lived in zero gravity your whole life because it's so easy and effortless, or at least you think it is, then you would lose your muscle mass, your strength, bone mass, because if you don't use things, you lose them. So that kind of tired saying of like, I went to school uphill both ways. And, it built my character. There's some truth to it. Just the same way exposure therapy works with anxiety. If you don't expose yourself to scary things, mildly scary things, gradually, you will end up being afraid of very unlikely stuff. Like, you'll be afraid of doorknobs, or, going outside, who's afraid of going outside? People who rarely do that. So like it's kind of a feedback loop that amplifies itself. The less I draw, the less skillful my drawings will end up. The more I draw, the less inhibited I will be with leaving a mark on paper. So yeah, going through tough times is like resistance training. Although something has to be said about moderation. So the same way you can overtax your muscles and hurt your tendons with taking up too much weight too fast, too soon, the same can be said for enduring tough situations. There are certain things that will not improve your resilience and character, but if it's too much, it will break you. So there's a certain threshold in which the hardship in your life can either build you up, or if it's too much, it can damage you. If it's a challenge that you can overcome and be better for it, great. And if it's healthy, but if it's a challenge that makes you, that jeopardizes your health and well-being, like living near some kind of toxic plant, or in an environmentally unsound area, then there are certain things that we can adapt to and be stronger for it, but there are some things that we shouldn't try to adapt to, because there's no point, because they will damage you. Like, you can be strong from going to school uphill both ways, makes your legs stronger, but like, is it building your character when you are forced to live in the back of your Toyota and have barely any food to eat? Certain things that we are told to adapt to are not healthy, so do not try to adapt to unhealthy things. Find things that you can adapt to that are actually healthy and that make you stronger. Like, your cardiac endurance of going uphill both ways, that you can go wrong there. It's healthy to a point. At some point maybe your heart might not take it if you have a condition, but yeah, so there's really no cookie cutter template for stuff that you might hear people advise you on. Everything is related to the individual needs, individual circumstances, and the thing that you are trying to achieve, the thing that you're engaging with. There's always a consequence for everything you do, even things that are as simple as drawing on paper, like I'm doing now. I have to be careful to take breaks and stretch, because it's a little bit of a one-sided activity that comes attached with certain occupational hazard, or of slight scoliosis or carpal tunnel syndrome. So even though it seems healthy to kind of sit down and draw, there are risks involved. If you do something repetitively for a long time, even if it's a very minor thing, like there are some runners who have been wearing slightly uncomfortable shoe. One of their shoes maybe had some kind of weird defect in an insole, and they they kind of kept pushing through it. But over time, because the shoe altered their gait just this one tiny bit, over time they developed an injury from it, kind of like drop by drop. The drops of water can chisel out a piece of granite, right? So it's something to be aware of, that even the smallest of the smallest actions done repetitively can affect you negatively or positively, which is also why it is a great thing to develop these, I would call them weak habits, or slight habits that are healthy, that you do literally a minute a day, and it adds up. Like imagine you would do squats a minute a day, just 1 minute. How much more strong and muscular your legs would be. Minute is a long time when it comes to certain things, like when you're very hungry and you're trying to hit something up in the microwave. Minute can feel like eternity. The same goes for exercise. If you are doing push-ups for 1 minute, even though the minute seems like a very short period of time, doing push-ups for 1 minute can be pretty grueling. So yeah, and also depending on how many push-ups you can do in a minute. It seems like there's a trend in. It's hard to avoid it. There's a trend in these drawings, sort of, because I'm drawing with right hand. It seems like there are these blobs always resulting from my drawing that are sort of directed this way. But whereas if I was switching to the left hand, which I can try just right now, the directionality of my shapes will change. And that's another thing that is nice to do, is to challenge your habits by switching. So like it just feels different. I feel like I'm more intent on drawing when I switch to the left hand, and it affects my thought process, and my speech is becoming a little bit more distracted. But it's a great thing to do, especially not just for your mind, but also in terms of occupational hazard. If you are kind of sloped to one side because of using just one hand, and it's kind of refreshing to switch, so that your spine gets a break from that one directional sort of movement. And also it just sometimes the teachers would give us this advice of, if you feel like you're falling into a trap of learned mannerisms, switch hands, or flip your drawing upside down and look at it, or hold a mirror to the side of your drawing and look at it as a reflection. And usually you will notice a lot of weirdness and irregularity in your own work that you wouldn't have otherwise noticed with the kind of proper right hand drawing. But yeah, it actually feels nice to have this new challenge, and the quality of line also changes. It feels a little bit more fresh. There's the one thing that David Bowie said that I really liked, which was an advice to an artist. That art is sort of like wading in a lake or river, in the water or in the ocean. You are kind of comfortably walking. The water is nice and warm, and it reaches your knees or your hips or even your waist or even your chest. But once in a while, it's nice to like venture a little deeper and almost kind of challenge yourself and be a little bit more unsure of what's underneath your feet. I kind of like that analogy to challenging yourself in creation, in making art, in creating stuff. And I think David Bowie not only preached it, but also showed that he's been not afraid of experimenting and changing things. I think that working with Brian Eno helped, because Brian Eno was really a proponent of this sort of challenge mindset in creating stuff. He really liked to challenge his musicians, the musicians he worked with on albums, to do things that they don't normally do. Are you a piano player? Grab a saxophone. You try to play it backwards or sing it with Italian accent. It was some kind of really ridiculous kind of commands that he came up with. He would give the artists he worked with, he would give them these cards, random cards, where they had these instructions written on them, and it usually would result with a really interesting, in an unexpected quality, kind of like that jazz musician I mentioned before, playing on this really crappy piano. So basically the same thing. It's just sort of creating, if there is no struggle, you just induce struggle artificially, because if there's no struggle, nothing interesting comes out of it. So yeah, it's a kind of maybe a little bit disappointing truth about life. It's that nothing comes easy. Even geopolitically, in the situation we're dealing with now, it's sort of like we became complacent to a point, living in a peacetime, and we kind of forgot what it takes to win, to fight and win certain freedoms that we take for granted. And then we're at the point where we have to assert those freedoms again, and freedom is not free, as the common slogan says. It's not something that's given to you. So the way it works is like there is an oppression, because the powerful will always surface and they will always try to get the largest slice of the pie, and they will try to limit the freedom of others, because you can't really own the world without inconveniencing the other people. There's only that much room. There's only that much money to go around. There's no unlimited amount of money that is out there in the world. So those who hoard giant sums of money and just freeze them in their accounts somewhere in the Cayman Islands, Canary Islands or whatever, in an offshore account, this money is gone. So there's less and less for everybody else, while those who hoard the amount of money that's astronomically huge that they will never be able to use in many lifetimes, they just freeze up the funds, the capital. Okay, I'm switching to right hand here again. So it's kind of up to the people themselves to assert these rights, and then for a while they can, win the rights back and write down the rights on a nice scroll with a goose feather pen with ink, and you create little, level of legitimacy. You have the Declaration of Independence stored in somewhere. I actually don't know where Declaration, but is it in the library, in the Congress library? Magna Carta is in the museum, I think. So the rights that people write down, and they think that they're bounding because they're written down, but the tyrant comes along, it doesn't matter anymore. They just say, you think you have rights because they're written on some parchment paper, and then they misinterpret those writings. They gaslight you into believing that what's written is not really there, or they tell you who deserves those rights. That's another thing. All men are created equal. The founding fathers overlooked women and slaves, because of course slaves were not considered human, but they created the Bill of Rights for fellow men. And good start, but it was not complete. And now it's like very easy to make them go poof. It doesn't matter anymore what's written, and the tyrant will do their tyranting. And then what's left is you just have to assert those rights again through sacrifice, blood and sweat and tears. And that's the way it's been for centuries. I think I talked about it in a previous video that might turn out controversial, but I don't care. I'm just talking out of my sleeve here because it's sort of an automatic stream of consciousness exercise. So I should have a disclaimer of the author of this video is not responsible for what his brain is blurting out. But, I'm sort of semi-aware of what I'm saying because I'm preoccupied with the pencil drawing. And it's sort of an interesting phenomenon where you are in control of your brain only to a certain extent, and you let your brain kind of meander, and what comes out is just the words that you listen to when you play it back, and you kind of almost surprised of what was the content of your brain. It's like, is that really what I think? Is that my opinion, really? It's kind of a very revealing exercise for what's really within you. But the key is to have some kind of distraction, like the drawing in my case here. But you can use stitching, you can use clay modeling. Some people use chemical enhancements. There's a new exciting research about using psychedelics as a therapeutic tool, and people have a lot of good results in battling their mental and even physical disorders like chronic pain, chronic fatigue. So the therapy is involving taking a certain amount of ketamine or psilocybin, and it's been made legal, but only in the context of therapy. So the professional will be with you, and you will engage with this therapy, and it's not dissimilar to what I'm doing now, except I'm perfectly in control of my brain right now because I'm not under influence of anything. I don't even drink alcohol, not even beer. I have coffee every day. I tried to quit it, but I figured I enjoy it too much and it doesn't really affect my health negatively. It helps me focus. But there's another paradox when it comes to coffee or other caffeinated boosters. They do make you feel awake and focused. But because you're addicted to them, without them you would feel very unfocused, very unoptimistic. You would have a headache. So is coffee helping you achieve this state of mind? And without coffee, people who don't drink coffee just feel normal. They don't feel extra stimulated, but they feel awake. They feel normal. I actually used to successfully wane off coffee. I quit coffee on multiple occasions actually, and it was difficult to go through the withdrawal, but when I didn't drink coffee, I was just feeling normal. But it was kind of like just being level-headed and always feeling the same. There was no ups and downs. Whereas with coffee, especially after a long break, when I take that sip of coffee, it just hits me and it just feels like suddenly someone turned on the light in the room. That's the way I could describe it. And I feel like I don't want to give up that feeling. And then when coffee wears off, I'm still feeling okay and I'm ready to go to bed. It's not a big deal. But yeah, if coffee becomes an issue, because growing coffee is becoming challenging due to climate change and erosion and the general destruction of soil and environment by humans, when coffee will be harder to acquire, I will consider quitting it because I don't want to be dependent on a substance that is expensive or hard to find. There's no point. So it's an addiction, but it's kind of a low-key addiction. It can be you can stop if you want to. Either cold turkey, which is brutal, or gradually, and then you're fine. So there are certain levels in how the substances affect you, and some of them are damaging. Like alcohol, I think because of the way market works, capitalism works, alcohol is kind of the role alcohol plays in damaging people is a little bit underplayed. I've had family members who died because of drinking, and that's sad because they had this addiction because they didn't have any alternatives. And their life was tough, and the only escape for them seemed to be church and vodka, because it's kind of a problem in Poland because of the way the problems are not really dealt with. People are kind of sweeping them under the rug, and they say, I just go to church and pray, and then when that is not enough, they just resort to drinking vodka. And there's a lot of culture of drinking in Poland. I always joke that they kicked me out of Poland because I didn't drink enough vodka. But it's sort of embedded within culture, and there's this etiquette of drinking where someone offers, you can't deny, and if you don't drink, you're considered weird. And it's like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you drink? But you know, my liver is damaged. Oh, come on, have a drink with me. And then there's this offensive kind of people acting offended when you reject their offer. Oh, you won't drink with me? How dare you? So this whole like hierarchies based on who you drank with. I remember students in my college bragging about, you know, oh, I drank with that. Did you drink with this professor yet? Or did you drink with someone? It's like this, almost like a initiation protocol. You are now accepted because you had vodka with that professor, and your grades will improve. I'm not kidding. It really was the kind of occurrence in Polish art school, art college. I won't mention names, but it wasn't pretty. I think it improved now. I think now people would get in trouble for that kind of thing. But back in the day, everything was sort of out of control and not really supervised, or there was a lot more allowance for misbehavior and misconduct. A lot of sexism, racism, and xenophobia. It was kind of difficult to be an exchange student from Bangladesh or somewhere where white people don't live, and then coming to Poland where everybody looks the same, even haircuts are identical. It becomes difficult to deal with the prejudice and so the shape, the rectangle is filled up with graphite, but I think I need more. I need some kind of more definitive decisions. I'll just cover this with some gray value. Look at it, squint at it, see what it wants to be. There are some parts that I kind of want to eliminate too here. Sometimes showing too much is killing the interest. It's like, if you have these like convoluted, complicated shapes all over the surface, then there's no focal point, and sometimes it's worth it to just kind of fuzz everything out. Is that a word? Blur everything else out in order to show the focal point of some sort. So it's a exercise in balance and composition, and composition is something that is learned, but also it's something that just appeals to our inherent ways our brain feels satisfied with certain shapes and arrangements, as opposed to shapes and arrangements that make us feel uneasy, like as if there was something wrong. So especially people with OCD or ADHD are suffering from imperfections. I'm not diagnosed with any of those disorders. I mean, they're disorders, but also they, in some ways, are superpowers. In many ways, a lot of people who had amazing breakthroughs in science and art were actually diagnosed with OCD or ADHD, because any way that makes your brain work differently, or maybe on a higher level of intensity, leads to interesting outcomes, or even going about something differently which is something you can't really feign. You can't fake being different. It just happens. Like Einstein, who was, for a long time as a child, he was considered not very bright. His parents were concerned because he wasn't speaking until late in his life, and also he wasn't really good student at school. He was distracted, but he was thinking about his own problems, and eventually it led to creating his own patterns of learning, separate from what school offered as a cookie cutter kind of approach, which is a problem in education. And then once you're allowed to develop your ideas according to how your brain wants to work, how your brain works, then you will be uninhibited with, creating interesting work. So the problem with mainstream education is that it's focusing on making sure that the kids acquire all the information, bits of information that seems totally out of context to reality. So they are forced to memorize these formulas for apparently no reason. And then they're being tested on how they memorize these bits of information. And there's no context to it. Whereas if you manage to spark their curiosity, it's enough to trigger the avalanche of learning, because things are connected. So the way I understood my own learning was, of course, I was really bad at these, prescribed educational ways. I was bad at doing homework, but I think I felt like the real learning started when I was done with schools, because then I was focusing on what I'm truly interested in. In my case, it was art. And if you're interested in art, it doesn't mean that you're just going to end up mindlessly drawing things or painting without any consideration for reality. You do have to look things up. You have to look up, what kind of paints to use. You look up the theory of color and the way human eye and human brain perceives colors and reality in general, optical illusions, the illusions that the brain kind of falls for. Then maybe chemical composition of pigments, where they came from, what minerals they're made of, where the minerals are found, or where the minerals have been found historically. And then you learn about geopolitical history of, the region from which that mineral was extracted. Maybe there were wars fought over this mineral, like lapis lazuli, found in Afghanistan. Very beautiful shade of blue was created out of this stone. And there's a lot of history involved, trading routes, and you're learning about trade and wars and history, and then you look at medieval paintings, and you realize that this painting has a lot of lapis lazuli. It must be because whoever commissioned it was very wealthy and wanted to show off. So like there's almost too much blue in that painting. It's it's kind of nice to draw these conclusions that are just arising from learning, from looking things up, and it connects. So with caring about art, I learn geology, geography, history, chemistry, physics. It's just enough to be curious about one thing and everything follows. Geometry, that's sort of, it was unavoidable for Renaissance artists to also be mathematicians and architects and naturalists, because that's how human brain naturally learns and acquires information. Everything is connected. So it doesn't, I bet it didn't feel for a Renaissance person to be, it didn't feel like they acquired knowledge about totally separate things, but it all came together. If Leonardo da Vinci was a great draftsman, he knew how to draw a human figure, he would also get inspired by the way humans are built, by anatomy, and then he thought about buildings, how to build architecture based on these inspirations, and then he was inspired by sketching nature and water, and he tried to figure out how the water works, and then came up with some interesting water mill solutions, certain devices that were powered by flowing water, flying machines, but it's all connected. It's like the Leonardo da Vinci's sketchbook. It's just basically a collection of different inspirations from nature. And then the way our education works is just, first you learn all this random information for who knows what reason, and then you specialize in something narrowly, which is also not a good idea. And then you never venture out of your specialization. You're not a Renaissance person. You just, you're specializing in, if you're a doctor, you're specializing in stomach, digestive system, or you're specializing in sinuses, and then the patient comes to you with a headache, and then you look at their sinuses and say, there's nothing wrong with you, it's all fine. But they don't realize that it's the digestive system doctor that the patient should have come to, because apparently the overproduction of acid can negatively affect the sinuses and can actually annoy your sinuses and can cause headache. And there's really no holistic approach in anything we learn the way it was in Renaissance. It's just, you have a problem, go to Leonardo. He was going to help you with whatever you want. And speaking of Leonardo da Vinci, this drawing doesn't even hold a candle to what he could do with the pencil. But I don't mind it. So it's a bunch of blobs again, but I'm glad I salvaged this kind of drawing that was destined to be forgotten. And then sometimes I might work on these drawings some more off camera, in which case I will just put a still. Oh, there's a plane passing by. Whoa, military plane. Wow. There's a military base nearby here. It almost kind of looked like one of those World War II bombers. All right. Silence is good too. I feel like it needs something. No, it's blobs. I feel like it's lacking a three-dimensionality and distance. It's kind of nice to try to achieve it. Looks like guts. It might be time to get some lunch. All right, I will end the video here, but if I happen to work on it some more, I'm just going to show you the final result as a still image in the end. And with that, thank you for your attention and see you later.